Hi friends, how are you today? I'm Texas Whisperer ASMR, and I'd like to share a little bit of Texas history with y'all. Tonight's story, the Texas City Disaster of 1947. But first, as is customary for me, I'll open a delicious Texas beer. Today, I'm drinking a Shiner Weisse N. That's good. Now on to our story for tonight. The Texas City Disaster of 1947 is considered the deadliest industrial accident in United States history. It's also one of history's largest non-nuclear explosions. Texas City is in Texas, located 37 miles southeast of Houston and 20 miles northwest of Galveston on the Galveston Bay. The port located at Texas City is one of the world's most important shipping hubs. It's estimated that over 47 million tons of cargo travel through the port, valued at around $11 billion USD. In 2008, the port of Texas City was the 14th leading port in the United States, and in 2007, it was considered the 87th leading port in the world. On April 16, 1947, a fire started on board a ship docked in the port. The ship was carrying a massive amount of combustible ammonium nitrate, so when it caught fire, it detonated, causing a massive explosion. This started a chain reaction of fire and explosions on other ships and nearby facilities and refineries, killing over 581 people and injuring over 4,000 more. It was the first class action lawsuit against the United States government, and more than $50 million in damages, $580 million today, were awarded once the legal proceedings were over. Sometimes when you have a dark topic, beer is a good salve for that. Nothing finer than a Shiner. On the day of our story, of April 16th, 1947, there were two important ships moored in the harbor. The first was the SS Grant Camp, a recently reactivated 437-foot-long cargo ship moored on Pier O at the Texas City port. It was originally built in Los Angeles in 1942, 5 years earlier, to serve during World War II. It was christened the SS Benjamin R. Curtis. It served in the Pacific Theater during the war and was later moved to Philadelphia once the war ended and stored there for later use. During the lead-up to the Cold War, it was reactivated and reassigned to assist in the rebuilding of France, and now is owned by the Republic of France. Excuse me. On that day in April 1947, it carried small arms, ammunition, machinery, large bales of twine, and 2,300 tons of ammonium nitrate. The Grant Camp had arrived from the nearby port of Houston, about 40 miles northwest of Texas City, where the Port Authority did not permit loading hazardous materials like ammonium nitrate. The second ship in question was the SS High Flyer, which was docked about 600 feet away from the Grant Camp. It also contained about 961 short tons of ammonium nitrate and 1,800 short tons of sulfur. This particular beer that I'm drinking is a wheat beer brewed with dewberries and natural flavor. It really is delicious. This comes from a Shiner family pack. It's quite good. So a note about ammonium nitrate, which is pretty important to the story here. Ammonium nitrate is a chemical compound known as NH4NO3. It's usually used in agriculture as a fertilizer, since nitrogen is a critical nutrient for plants to grow and ammonium nitrate contains a high amount of nitrogen. We could thank nitrogen-rich fertilizers like ammonium nitrate for helping to solve hunger crises that arose at the end of World War II, since it was able to grow abundant crops that yielded higher return than previous farming methods. In fact, the ammonium nitrate in the ships at the port, along with some stored fertilizer in an adjacent warehouse, were intended for export to farmers in Europe who were still rebuilding after the war. However, it's also very explosive. It's a major ingredient of ANFO, a popular industrial explosive that consists of ammonium nitrate and fuel oil. ANFO accounts for about 80% of all commercial explosives in North America used for construction, mining, and quarrying. It's also a key ingredient in homemade explosives, sometimes used as acts of terrorism, such as the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995 that killed at least 168 people. In recent years, many countries have begun phasing it out of consumer products due to these kinds of misuses, not to mention the wide number of commercial accidents. Now, the ammonium nitrate that was sitting in the cargo holds in Texas City on that day in 1947 was manufactured in Nebraska and Iowa, where it was packaged in 100-pound moisture-proof paper sacks. Then it was shipped to Texas City by a railroad before being loaded on the docks. Transporting it on the railroad means that it was exposed to more heat than it was rated for, which increased its chemical activity and made it more likely to ignite. Torn and damaged paper sacks were supposed to be refilled and repaired by Coast Guard regulations, but the longshoremen that day instead stowed them with the rest of the cargo, damaged bags and all, meaning ammonium nitrate was lying loose on the floor of the cargo hold. Cheers. Can you believe this is only 95 calories? Goes down easy. Boy, two berries are delicious. So at 8 a.m. that day, longshoremen arrived at the docks to continue loading the SS Grant Camp with ammonium nitrate, which they had begun loading the previous day. While loading, some of them noted that the bags seemed warm to the touch. At around 8:15 a.m., they spotted smoke coming from the cargo hold, and so they lowered 4 fire extinguishers into the hold as a precaution and began applying it to the smoking cargo. Shortly after, flames and more smoke were spotted on board other areas of the ship. An alarm was sounded on the ship's whistle, and the captain ordered all personnel out of the cargo hold. They covered the hatch, and they put a tarp down to wet it with water. Then they steamed the hold, which was a firefighting technique rather, where steam is piped in to extinguish fires in order to preserve the cargo so that they wouldn't ruin it. But instead of helping to control the fire, the hot steam may have contributed to the fire by converting the ammonium nitrate in the hold to nitrous oxide, which increased the already intense heat in the ship's cargo hold. The fire continued to spread, and the volume of smoke, which was orange in color, increased. The crew left the vessel and assembled at the end of Pier O, where the ship was docked, while 27 of the 28-member Texas City Fire Department arrived on the scene to bring the fire under control. Spectators nearby noted that the water around the docked ship was boiling from the heat, and the splashing water touching the hull was vaporized into steam. The cargo hold and deck began to bulge as the pressure of the steam increased inside. Eventually, the steam pressure inside the ship blew the hatches open, and more yellow-orange smoke billowed out, a color typical for nitrogen dioxide fumes. The unusual color of the smoke attracted spectators along the shoreline who believed they were at a safe distance. This included schoolchildren who had stopped to watch the events unfold. At 9:15 a.m., about an hour after the fire was first spotted, the ammonium nitrate reached an explosive threshold, from the combination of heat and pressure, and the Grand Camp detonated. Glad I have my beer with me today to help us through this story. History's not always pretty. This is definitely one of those times. But you know what is pretty? Shiner Weisse N, made with dewberries. It's unclear what started the initial fire on board the Grand Camp. It may have been a cigarette discarded the previous day, meaning the ship's cargo had been smoldering throughout the night when the fire was discovered on the morning of the day of the explosion in April. Longshoremen on the Grand Camp were not issued any specific non-smoking instructions while loading into the cargo hold, so it is possible. Excuse me. And smoking on the main deck was not uncommon. So it was the 40s after all. All persons loading cargo that day appeared to display a lack of knowledge on best practices to handle ammonium nitrate. Regardless, when it detonated, the Grand Camp blast created a 15-foot wave that could be seen nearly 100 miles from the Texas shoreline. The blast leveled about 1,000 buildings on land nearby. The Monsanto Chemical Company plant and offices, which were located directly across from where the Grand Camp was moored, were completely blown away. Refineries and chemical tanks on the waterfront nearby also ignited and began to burn. The Grand Camp's anchor was hurled across the city, and 2 sightseeing airplanes who were flying nearby were blown out of the sky. Falling bales of burning twine from the ship's cargo added to the damage. And 15 miles away in Galveston, half of the windows in the town were shattered, and people were knocked to their knees. You know, the brewery that makes Shiner, I can never say the name of it. Spetzel, something German. It's okay. I don't have to name it. I just have to drink it, and I do. Official casualty estimates came to a total of 567, including all the crewmen who remained aboard the Grand Camp, and spectators and school children who had been drawn to the spectacle by the orange smoke. All but one member of the 28-man Texas City Volunteer Fire Department were vaporized in the initial explosion on the docks while fighting the fire. The one member of the fire department who did survive wasn't even there. He hadn't been able to respond to the initial call yet. But as the sole surviving member, he was able to coordinate after the explosion with 200-some firefighters who arrived from nearby cities to assist. 3 of the 4 members of the Texas City Heights Volunteer Fire Department who were also on the docks near the burning ship that day were also killed. And again, the one surviving member of that department wasn't even there. He was still driving into work when the explosion happened, and he heard about it on the radio. That's a bad place to hear about your whole department being destroyed. The explosions were so powerful and intense that many of the bodies of these and other emergency workers who responded to the initial explosion were never accounted for. With fires raging throughout Texas City and thick black smoke billowing everywhere, first responders from other areas outside of Texas City were initially unable to reach the site of the disaster until those smaller fires and debris had been cleared away. All Coast Guard crafts, who were available in nearby Galveston, about 15 miles away, immediately headed to Texas City. They were better able to reach the site of the explosion from the water, and they participated in fire and rescue efforts. These emergency responders were instrumental in caring for the injured and recovering the bodies of the deceased. Brewed to beat the Texas heat. This Shiner Original has all the flavor of a wheat beer, but with only 95 calories. It's unfiltered and brewed with native Texas dewberries, so it's perfect for kicking back, taking it nice and easy. So the fires at the site of the explosion soon spread to other piers at the harbor, where additional cargo ships were moored. Nearby at Pier A, the SS High Flyer was moored. It was classified as a dead ship, which means that the engine was not operable, as it was in the process of being inspected. It would take 24 to 36 hours to make the engine operable. When the initial fire was spotted on the Grand Camp, loading of the High Flyer was suspended, and fire precautions were put in place similar to the Grand Camp. And the same occurred at Pier B, where the SS Wilson B. Keene was moored, although it was only carrying flour and could have been operable in as little as 30 minutes in an emergency. Nevertheless, the explosion on the Grand Camp was close enough to damage the nearby High Flyer. Decks were buckled, the hatch covers were blown off, steam lines were ruptured, and the engine room was filled with dangerously hot steam. Personnel in the engine rooms were only able to escape through an emergency shaft tunnel. Injured survivors were located, and all crew members departed from the High Flyer and the Keene by 10:30 a.m. There was no evidence of fire on board either ship at this time. But at about 8 p.m. that night, amid rumors of a second possible explosion, it was decided that tugboats should be sent to remove the High Flyer and pull it into the water away from the slip. So tugboats arrived at 11 p.m., and sparks and burning embers were seen coming from the holds of the High Flyer. Tug crews worked for 2 hours to try and pull the boat from the dock, but they were unable to cut it free from the dropped anchor in the bay. Finally, smoke, fumes, and fire coming from the hold became so severe that it was no longer possible to work, and all personnel and tugs left the area. At 12:55 a.m. on April 17th, the area was ordered evacuated. And 15 minutes later, at 1:10 a.m., after smoke had been pouring from the hold for over 5 hours, and about 15 hours after the explosions aboard the Grand Camp, the High Flyer also exploded, ramming into the nearby SS Wilson B. Keene. The High Flyer was completely destroyed, and nearby warehouses and piers were demolished in the blast. That second explosion was just as large and devastating as the Grand Camp, although only one death was reported, since the area had already been evacuated. Fires resulting from the cataclysmic events were still burning a week after the disaster, and the process of body recovery took nearly a month. Witnesses compared the scene to the devastation of the atom bomb detonation at Nagasaki at the end of World War II. And if you look at photographs that were taken after the explosion, it does look like a huge bomb went off. Of the 468 human remains that were located, 405 were identified, and 63 have never been identified. The unidentified remains were placed in a memorial cemetery in the north part of Texas City. An additional 113 people were classified as missing, for no identifiable parts were ever found. This figure includes the firefighters who were aboard the Grand Camp when she exploded. There is some speculation that there were hundreds more killed, but uncounted, including visiting seamen or non-census laborers and their families, and a large number of travelers. More than 5,000 people were injured, with 1,784 admitted to 21 area hospitals. More than 500 homes were destroyed, and hundreds were damaged, leaving 2,000 people homeless. The seaport was destroyed, and many businesses were flattened or burned. Over 1,100 vehicles were damaged, and 362 freight cars were obliterated. The property damage was estimated at $100 million, or $1.2 billion in 2020 US dollars. That's a ton of money. That just gets blown away. It's crazy. Almost through with the story, and I'm almost through with my beer. It's going to be good timing. The disaster received national media attention, with offers of assistance coming from around the country. Several funds were established to handle donations, namely the Texas City Relief Fund, headed by the city's mayor, Curtis Trahan. One of the largest fundraising efforts for the city and the victims of the disaster was organized by Sam Maceo. I think that's how you say it, Sam Maceo. One of the two brothers who ran organized crime in Galveston at the time. Maceo organized a large-scale benefit on the island, bringing entertainers like Frank Sinatra to perform. In the end, the Texas City Relief Fund raised more than $1 million or $12 million today. Payouts for fire insurance claims reached nearly $4 million or $45 million today. Within days of the disaster, major companies that had lost operating facilities announced plans to rebuild and in some cases expand in Texas City. There were many legal cases seeking compensation at the time also, many of which were combined into Elizabeth Dalehite et al. V. United States under the recently enacted Federal Tort Claims Act. On April 13, 1950, the district court found the United States responsible for a list of negligent acts in the manufacture, packaging, and labeling of ammonium nitrate. This was compounded by the transport, storage, loading, fire prevention, and fire suppression, all of which led to the explosions and the fatalities. However, this was later overturned by the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals and then affirmed by the U.S. Supreme Court, who noted that a private person is held to a higher standard of care when carrying out inherently dangerous acts, such as transportation and storage of explosives, and therefore the U.S. government could not be held liable for what occurred at Texas City in 1947. Nevertheless, relief was eventually granted by Congress, and when the last claim had been processed in 1957, nearly a decade after the disaster, nearly $17 million in awards had been distributed. Let's finish this beer now. Oh man. Sad to see it go. Sad to see this beer go. Like I'm sad to see y'all go. The city has been called the town that would not die. And if you visit Texas City today, which you should, you'll again find a bustling port city of over 52,000 people spread across 186 miles. It's home to the Monsanto plant, the Shell and Chevron oil refineries, and remains a massive port of trade for businesses around the world. Regardless of how you feel about the companies that maintain their presence and trade in Texas City, there's no denying that the city accomplished a massive feat to rebuild and expand after the devastating disaster of 1947. I, for one, can respect that, and I hope you can too. Thanks for joining me for this bit of Texas history and a delicious Texas beer. If you're interested in more Texas history and cinematic ASMR, please subscribe, like, and comment below. Until next time, friends, I'll see you later.